After October the 7th, without there being any justification for them doing so, Hezbollah entered the fray in support of Hamas inside the Gaza Strip. And it proceeded to terrorize Israel to such a degree that approximately 80,000 of Israel's citizens who lived well within the range of the rockets being fired from southern Lebanon by Hezbollah, 80,000 of those civilians were evacuated from their homes and were essentially dispersed throughout Israel, out of the firing line, and had to live essentially as refugees within their own land for no less than a year. After that year had passed, after the Israel Defense Forces had dismantled approximately 24 of Hamas's battalions and really taken the fight to Hamas inside the Gaza Strip, it was able to turn its attention to Hezbollah and to counter the terror threat emanating from there. But prior to it doing so, one of the stated requirements that Israel wanted to extract from any end to the fighting between the IDF and Hezbollah was that there would be a buffer zone established in southern Lebanon into which Hezbollah operatives would not be permitted to return. And ultimately, after the fighting, after the IDF did close on, engage, and deal massive military blows and show massive military successes against Hezbollah, the idea of a permanent buffer zone was essentially abandoned. And that was a grave mistake. When that ceasefire agreement was announced, I was a virulent opponent of the agreement because one of the primary lessons learned from the horrors of October 7th is that Israel can never again permit the civilian population in Gaza or the civilian population inside southern Lebanon to be proximate to the Israeli border, because it's from among the civilian population that these terror organizations recruit their forces. It's among the civilian population that these terror organizations ensconce themselves. It's within civilian infrastructure that they establish their missiles, their rocket launchers, and their base commands. And as a consequence of that, the civilian population cannot be permitted to be close to the border, but much more importantly, nor can the terror organization, in this case Hezbollah, be permitted to come close to the border. And that is why the IDF is insistent that it retains control of 5 hilltops arrayed across southern Lebanon so that it can prevent the reconstitution of Hezbollah right at the border with Israel. Now, Joseph Aoun, the president of Lebanon, is supposed to be entering into negotiations in order to bring about a situation where there is only one military with one set of guns, with one set of weapons, and that military will be the Lebanese armed forces. But he has not yet entered those negotiations. Hezbollah seems very reluctant to lay down its arms, and the IDF absolutely cannot be reasonably expected to take Hezbollah's assurances that it will disarm in order to enter into negotiations. First, Hezbollah must disarm, then perhaps there can be negotiations, but the IDF and Israel cannot be expected to enter into negotiations with the forlorn hope that after doing so, Hezbollah will indeed disarm. It's not an organization to be trusted. It's an organization that exists in order to destroy the state of Israel. It's an organization that has wrought terror against the people of Israel, and it needs to be kept well away from Israel's borders. I think that the rapid return of Prime Minister Netanyahu to the Oval Office this last week really demonstrated, firstly, the degree of access that Israel's Prime Minister has to the President of the United States. I cannot recall a time where there have been 2 successive meetings between Prime Minister Netanyahu and any president in the time frame that we have witnessed here of late. With that having been said, I believe that there is reason for very real concern when one analyzes the content of the joint press conference that took place. Firstly, Prime Minister Netanyahu went to the White House ostensibly to see if he could persuade President Trump to roll back the 17.5% tariff that he was imposing on all Israeli goods entering into the United States. President Trump was very non-committal on that prospect, despite Prime Minister Netanyahu announcing that he was ending all of the tariffs that Israel levied against American exports into the state of Israel. So that was a very disappointing outcome. In addition to that, President Trump justified his unwillingness to commit to bringing about an end to the recently imposed 17.5% tariff regime by expressing that, in his view, Israel receives billions of dollars, and I'm paraphrasing here, but billions of dollars of assistance from the United States of America. That's not the full story. What viewers need to understand and recognize is that, yes, Israel does receive billions of dollars of military aid. It doesn't receive any economic aid from the United States of America, but it does receive billions of dollars of military aid, approximately $3.5 billion per year. But there is a condition attached to that, which is that military aid must be spent to the tune of about 75–80% of it on American hardware. And therefore, this actually is something of a jobs program for the Americans. So that's the first thing that people should keep in mind. In addition to that, President Trump announced that almost at the highest level, the United States is going to begin direct negotiations with the Iranians around the Iranian nuclear weapons program. I think that will have been to great disappointment to the Israelis. The fact that President Trump has announced it overtly is probably in no small part a consequence of the fact that Israel, much to its chagrin, discovered that direct negotiations between Special Envoy for Hostages, Adam Boehler, were taking place with Hamas without Israel having been told about that. And when it was revealed that those negotiations were taking place, Israel was very disappointed and made every effort to convey just how opposed it was to that policy directly to the Americans. But President Trump's desire to engage directly with the Iranians should not come as a surprise. He showed a very real willingness to engage with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. He has expressed his desire to engage with Vladimir Putin of Russia. And I think that part of the Trump doctrine is to have direct engagement with those that he wishes to dialogue with and with those he wishes to enter into negotiations with. There was one point that I think was very deliberately made by Prime Minister Netanyahu during that press conference, which was that he spoke about his acceptance that there may be a positive outcome of direct negotiations potentially if those negotiations were going to follow a model of negotiations such as we saw in Libya with Gaddafi, when it came to Gaddafi disarming himself of his nuclear weapons program. That negotiation and Gaddafi's ultimate disarming of his nuclear weapons program resulted some years thereafter in Gaddafi being lynched by a mob of his own people in the streets of Tripoli. I believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned that specific scenario because he wanted to drive away the Iranians from the negotiating table, and he wanted to telegraph to them that, while President Trump may want to negotiate with you, you should perhaps think twice about doing so, because you could end up sharing a fate similar to that of Gaddafi in Libya. So I don't think that was arbitrary language. And in a video message later recorded in Hebrew by Prime Minister Netanyahu, he expressed that if the result of these negotiations should be the detonation and the exploding of the Iranian nuclear weapons program by the Americans, that will be an acceptable outcome. Anything short of that will not be acceptable.